study it is.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't worry about that.
There we go. With the call.
Okay. All right, that's good. So it's good to be with you folks. It's 9 o'clock and time to start. We have a fair number of letters that have been sent to us by email, so I'm going to go ahead and start with those. And still, though, feel free to type in your questions live. This first question is a little long. This is a lady who says, I helped my 23-year-old son drive to New York, which is his new home, this past weekend from Florida, and I stayed for 3 days before flying home. He has a very critical spirit and judges others around him quite severely. A lot of the time he does it in a joking way, but it still hurts and it's offensive. Most of the time I tell him that he's being rough on other people, his sister, brother, and so on. He doesn't pick on me too often, but this weekend he did. And I know I handled it wrong, but I don't know what I should have done differently. He criticized the way I drove, the way I tip people, the way I converse with people, the way I don't converse with people, the way I walk, my choices for purchases, my not making my desires known, because basically I don't want to ask for something way out there that no one wants to do and cause grief. What I eat, what I don't eat, you name it, I do it wrong. So she gave an example of her being in Chinatown and making a purchase, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she made a purchase and he didn't like the way she did it, and she asked for it wrong, and she made the purchase all wrong with this guy, and they were on the subway, and he didn't like what she did, and then they got on the subway and he teased her about it, and she cried, and she said, I told him I don't understand why he always takes the side of the other person. And she got all offended, and she said, she just doesn't understand. She said, I know that I had my love tank full enough to deal with this, shop owner that she made the purchase, where she made the purchase, as his abruptness probably took me down to 75%, and I was moving on. But when my son ridiculed me, that took me down to 0%. When he apologized, that could have been the end, and it would have been over, but then we discussed it further, and I just couldn't get past his judgment of me. We didn't speak all the way home, and I don't know what to do now. Right in the beginning, you said, most of the time when he criticizes people, he does it in a joking way, but it still hurts, and when he joked with you, you said, it's offensive and it hurt my feelings. And that's where we make our mistake, when we say that what somebody else does hurts our feelings. We forget to see that, and it's a two-pronged approach. We forget to see, intellectually speaking, that what other people are doing is a result of what they're missing. Your son obviously is really empty. He walks around attacking and criticizing people, like you said, all the time. His brothers, his sisters, you, other people, shop owners, whoever. He criticized everything you did. And he has a need to do that because as he criticizes you and tells you what to do and tells you what's wrong with you and tells you what you should have done and shouldn't have done, it makes him feel important. Every little comment, every little thing he says makes him feel valued, makes him feel superior to you, makes him feel like he's in control of you. It gives him a feeling of value, importance, and power. And when you see that he's just drowning and empty, that alone can make a huge difference. But sometimes that's not enough. And the other half of it is seeing that you don't feel very loved. So, like you said, you felt pretty full. You could deal with the shop owner who wasn't very loving. But when your son was criticizing you, that just took you down to zero. And the reason for that, of course, is that you still have expectations that your son will be kind to you, that your son will love you. And he can't. He can't. He's not able to, and it's not his job. He's your boy, and it's your job to love him unilaterally, love him one way. So that's an intellectual step. So far we've talked about your understanding your son, and your understanding that he's drowning, and your understanding that you're drowning. But that's intellectual. So the more important thing is you being involved in the ongoing process of getting the love that you need so that you don't require it of your son. Doing what you're doing now, which is attending the video chat so that you feel more accepted as you're telling the truth about yourself, which you're doing right now, and feeling just a sense of acceptance that you're just learning, you're just growing, even though we're doing this by doing this electronically. Then you tell the truth about yourself on teleconference calls. You tell the truth about yourself in person to people who are experienced with real love, and get the feeling of acceptance that comes as you tell the truth about your mistakes, your flaws, the fact that you're not quite able to unconditionally love your son while he's being a bit of a jerk here and criticizing you and not loving you, and allow people to love you while you're not able to be unconditionally loving. As you fill up with the unconditional love of other people, then you won't require that your son be loving to you. The more love you have from other people, it won't matter to you how your son behaves. Now, this is a long-term solution. You're getting unconditional love from other people. In the short term, I understand that there will be times that your son will come at you and pick at you and pick at you and bother you and attack you and criticize you. And in the short term, there will be times that you just can't stand it. You'll empty out. So I've explained to you that you could understand that he's drowning. You can understand that you're drowning, that you need to get more love for yourself. But there will still be times that despite all of that advice that I just gave you, you'll still empty out. I get it. What do you do then? You don't need to let him walk up and down your back. And you don't have to become angry at him and lash out at him and say, you really have to stop that, because controlling him isn't going to be any more effective than his trying to control you. So what can you do? You can say to him, just as any of us would do when somebody's attacking us, you can say when he criticizes you, I appreciate what you're saying, that, for example, I didn't handle very well the interaction with the shopkeeper. You can say, I understand what you're telling me about the shopkeeper, or about the way I drive, or about the way I tip, or about the way I whatever. First, you need to listen to him and say, I understand what you're saying. I do that imperfectly. I do a million other things imperfectly. So listen to what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying. I have many imperfections. And right now, I really don't have the ability to listen to much more of this. I don't. I just can't hear anymore. I'm not telling you that you can't say anymore. You can say all you want. But if you have more to say as far as advice and criticism and suggestions and about what I should do differently, I'm just telling you that I'm at the point where I wouldn't be able to hear anymore. And so I'd need to be somewhere else. So you can sit here, for example, let's say you're eating. You can sit here and finish your meal, but I'd need to finish my meal on the other side of the restaurant. And I wouldn't be mad about it, but I wouldn't be able to keep hearing anymore. So notice, you wouldn't be telling him to quit. You're not telling him to stop. You're not trying to control him. You're not angry. But you're also making it so that you don't completely empty out and go crazy and cry. You see? You're not getting to the end of your rope. We wait way too long before we say something. We get absolutely, completely emptied out, and then we keep staying in environments that we can't handle. And that's just dumb. We get to where we can't be loving, and then we keep hanging in there, as though we think that's the loving thing to do. No, it's just dumb to keep doing that. We hang on past our ability to hang on, and then we're completely emptied out. We can't love anybody, and we're destroyed. So you don't need to do that. And you don't need to control anybody, and you don't need to blow up, and you don't need to set boundaries, and you don't need to get furious. You just say, I can't handle any more than that. Now with some people can't even hear that. You just need to say, I need to excuse myself. Like, let's say you're at a dinner party. You wouldn't say to everybody in the dinner party, I can't handle the fact that you're all being critical and superficial and whatever. It'd be kind of silly to stand up on a coffee table and tell everybody, I'm sick of your superficial conversation. That'd be absurd. And so what you do is just excuse yourself and go home. Get a cab. Go outside and drink a Coke. Whatever. But you get out of any unloving situation that you feel you can't handle. I talked to a woman on the phone who asked about her interaction with her daughter. Her daughter was feeling stressed, and she, the mother, was wondering how to figure out whether she was just supporting her daughter or trying to fix her daughter. So she went on and on about the advice that she was giving her daughter. Her daughter was feeling all stressed and agitated about the decisions that she was trying to make, and the mother was giving her daughter suggestions and advice and support and all this, and the mother was telling me how she was worried about whether this was helping or that was helping, and she was telling me that her daughter was making poor decisions, and her daughter was doing too much of this and doing too much of that, and the mother was just absolutely tied up in a knot about how her daughter's life was going. And then she said to me, the mother, so how do I tell whether I'm just supporting my daughter or whether I'm trying to fix her? Well, how easy is this? It's really easy. You tell by whether you're emotionally attached to what you're doing. And here the daughter isn't even in the room, and the mother is just tied up in knots as she's describing to me the interaction that she had with her daughter. So I can tell the mother with perfect assurance that when she was talking to her daughter, she was attached. I can tell the mother that she was trying to fix her daughter and wasn't just trying to support her, because she had an enormous attachment to what her daughter was doing. She was worried. She was feeling guilty about, how she'd screwed her daughter up. She had judgments about what her daughter was doing, whether it was right or wrong. She was an emotional wreck. If you're really supporting somebody, you're not attached to what they do. You listen to them. You love them no matter what they do. You don't get excited whether they turn to the right or to the left. If they ask for advice, you give it. If they don't ask for advice, you usually don't give it. Now, if they appear to be utterly confused, for example, if I'm talking to somebody, whether they're my child or not, and they get to the place where they're utterly boxed in a corner and are lost, I mean like as in just completely confused about what their next step is. They have no clue. I may say to them, you appear to be clueless about what any of your next choices are. Is that true? If they say, I really don't, I have no idea. Well, then I may say, well, would you like, I don't know, 2 or 3 options from which you could choose? Would you? If they say, well, sure, I really would, then I may suggest 2 or 3 options from which they could choose, being unattached to which of those options they then choose, which is different than giving them advice, which is saying, you really ought to do this. So that's how you tell whether you're supporting or fixing. Fixing is when somebody, for example, on a conference call says, this is happening, and somebody jumps in and says, you really ought to do this. That's fixing. Or it's even fixing when you say, well, you might consider this, and it sounds like you're unattached, but then when they don't listen to your advice, you get anxious about whether they do. Then, even though your words don't sound like fixing, you still are. And this mother was definitely trying to fix her daughter. And eventually people feel that. And when they feel like you're trying to fix them without your intending to do it, you communicate the message to them that they need fixing, that they're fatally flawed, that they're screwed up, that you don't have faith in them, that they're stupid, that they need you to solve their problems. And in the end, you really cripple them. You make them weaker by fixing them. So we often don't do people a favor by solving their problems. Here's somebody who says, how long do we try to be kind and loving with little to no expectations for anything in return in a new relationship without feeling like we're getting any of our needs met before having enough information to bail? I keep gathering information and it isn't looking so hot, but then I am now running on empty. When could a conversation look like that? Loving requests. What could a conversation look like that lovingly requests again for more without bailing, possibly prematurely? I'm having a hard time reading this. And not coming from queen victim. Okay. So, in other words, how could I engage in a kind of conversation where I could make loving requests without bailing prematurely and not coming from a victim place? He's always bragged to be romantic, generous, loves doing small gestures, is financially well off and smart beyond reason, but his actions are far from most of those claims. Yes, I need to make more calls, but I don't have a clear perspective in my victimhood state, and I feel a need to act soon, since I cannot avoid him and don't want to be cruel in my empty state. And then she says, arg! Well, my first suggestion is that if you're feeling like you're in an empty state, and this is not meant to be a flippant answer at all, if you're feeling like you're in an empty state, you might reconsider whether you should be dating at all, strongly, and be talking to wise men and women who know you well enough and ask them whether you should be dating. I mean this. Talk to people who really know you well and start from scratch, even though you're already dating, and ask them, as though you weren't, say, knowing what you know about me, do you think I should be in any relationship at all? See, I get asked this question constantly by people. They say, do you think I should be in a relationship with blank, this particular person? They ask me the wrong question all the time. The question they should be asking is, do you think I should be in a relationship with anyone? Because that is the important question. Because the answer to that question almost invariably is no. You shouldn't be. They asked me the wrong question. And most of the time, unless they ask me the right question, I won't change the question for them. So, no, you shouldn't be. If you're in a relationship where it tortures you to even ask the question, you shouldn't be in a relationship with anybody at all. And if you're having a really difficult time, like it's just killing you, where you keep asking over and over, oh, I just am not sure whether this is the right person, that's the answer, no. And it's also the answer to the other question. If it's killing you to know whether you should be in a relationship with that person, you shouldn't be in one with anybody. So here's this guy where he says, I keep gathering information and it isn't looking so hot. Well, what do you think that answer is? If it isn't looking so hot, A, you really shouldn't be in a relationship with that person. And here's somebody who it says, you're running on empty. Well, if you're running on empty consistently in a relationship with this guy, get out. Really, if you're not married to this guy, get out. Get out now. Get out yesterday. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. I'm not making this up and I'm not being flippant. Hurry up, because it doesn't get better. If you're running on empty already early in a relationship, when people are acting their best to earn your approval, what do you think it's going to be like later in a relationship when you're, for example, moved in together or married and they don't feel like they have to earn your approval anymore? You're dead. So get out. I've only been through a few thousand of these with people. I'm not serious. I'm serious about this. And that says he's always claimed and bragged to be romantic, generous, loves doing small gestures, and he claims all these things, but his actions are far from most of these claims. So he's claimed all of these things to earn imitation love from you, but the truth is far from what he claims to be. So he's an earner of imitation love, and because his claims are far from what he claims to be, he's also a profound liar. And you were willing to buy into the claims, which means you're not ready to discern the truth early in a relationship, which almost certainly means you're not ready to be in one. Now, that's just what it sounds like from here. In fact, it sounds pretty obvious from here. And it's not a criticism. It's just an assessment for how things are. I mean, when somebody says to me, get a tape measure and measure my height. And I put them up against a wall, and we take a board, and we mark their height on a wall, and they are 24 years old, and it's a man, and we measure their height, and they're 5'2". And then they say, am I tall? No, you're not. It's not a criticism. They're just 5'2", and they're not tall. So as you describe this, it just sounds like, for all the world, the evidence points to that this relationship isn't healthy, and it sounds like you're not quite ready for a romantic relationship yet. If you want more information, ask more people who know you well. But that's what the evidence points to. Strongly. Deanne asked me if I received her novel. I don't know. Unless it was about a rat, which I'm going to be getting to shortly. You let me know if it was about a rat. If it wasn't, I didn't. Here's somebody who says, my husband and I spent a day together alone. Just how he likes it, but it was only hours before he started attacking me and inviting me onto the field of death. I remembered what you said about hitting the brakes before the car went over the cliff, and I gently told him that I'd love to listen longer, and I was going to take a short walk first. Now, he translated that as I was totally abandoning him and rejecting him. You know, real love is just real crap, which I've heard before. Just one more thing to take me away from him. But nonetheless, she made the decision to not get on the field of death. That takes real courage to consistently decide, I'm not going to become involved in conflict. And when you make that decision, it can be very annoying to your partner, because our partners, what they do is they claim they just want to finish the discussion. That's what they say. They say, well, I just want to finish this discussion. I just want to have a talk. Well, when somebody comes at you and says, I just want to have a talk, that's not just a talk. What they're doing is they're pulling out the knives, the guns, the swords, the maces, the whole deal, and saying that they want to duke it out on the field of death. And just because somebody says they want to fight it out on the field of death doesn't mean that you're obligated to do that. You jump up on the field of death with somebody, then you are the moron. Just because somebody invites you to a perfectly good fight to the death doesn't mean that you have to accept their invitation. Just because they invite you insistently doesn't mean you have to accept. Just because the person who invites you is your spouse doesn't mean you have to accept. But we've come to believe all of our lives that if somebody says, well, you really have to come to this fight, we believe we have to. And we were taught that from the time we were kids on the school ground. If somebody tells us that we have to come to the fight, we believe that we have to attend. And you don't. You can say, no, thank you. No, I really choose not to attend this fight. If you want to participate in a loving way, you can choose to do that. But if you feel like you can't participate in a conversation in a loving way, you don't attend at all. Here's somebody who says, a couple who are friends of mine are having a disagreement about whether or not the wife's mother, who is 83, should come for a visit. The wife wants her to, for many reasons, including that she's afraid the mother might die before she comes for another visit. And the wife would feel guilty about that. The husband is not wanting the mother to come because she's demanding, gets into things he doesn't want her to, and basically just irritates him while she is visiting. This is becoming an issue of contention between them. So how do you handle this? These are tough deals, but it comes down to let's make this between Donna and I, because it's easier to talk about. Instead of saying him and her, because I don't know the names of these people, and then I don't have to keep saying the wife's, mother's, friends. It's too complicated. So let's say that Donna's mother wants to come and visit. We're going to make this hypothetical because Donna's mother is dead, and that would be kind of scary if Donna's mother came to visit. At least it would be scary for the neighbors. Donna would actually enjoy the visit. So let's say Donna's mother wanted to come and visit, and I objected. The basic rule to remember is, what is the most loving thing? Now, the most loving thing would be if I just were loving enough to say, well, sure, I'd be glad to have her come over. But let's suppose that Donna's mother is, as you described, manipulative, angry, hateful, gets into the garbage, kicks the dog around. She's just more than I can handle. And I just can't stand having Donna's mother over. So it can appear to be an unsolvable problem when, two people approach each other saying this. Well, I say, Donna says to me, well, if you were loving, you'd let my mother come over. And I say to her, yeah, and if you were loving, then you'd understand having your mother over nearly puts me into the grave. Well, see, this appears to be unsolvable, because two people are both saying, if you were loving, then you'd let me have my wish, and both of these wishes are incompatible. Well, see, the thing is, nobody has the right to initiate an action when there appears to be a conflict that will cause pain or fear for the other person. And when that's the case, inaction has to prevail. Does that make sense? So, doing nothing has to be the decision that has to win. So, as we sit here in our home, Donna's mother's not here. So that's the prevailing condition. If bringing Donna's mother into the home causes somebody pain and fear, whether it's Donna or me, then we really can't do that. So we can't do anything that causes pain or fear to anybody who's here without both of us agreeing. Now, how are we going to solve this? Oh, once we understand that it's about loving, then there are a number of solutions. So, for example, I could say to Donna, sweetie, I just can't stand your mother. I mean, your mother just makes me crazy. I'd rather have my foot run over by a truck. I'd rather hang by the neck for an hour than have your mother here. But I understand that you'd want to have her here for a week. So how about if we do this? I've got a week of vacation coming up. And so why don't I go to, Oahu for a week, and you have your mother here. And Donna says, well, but I want to go to Oahu for a week. And I go, yeah, I know, but, that's the price you pay. I just can't stand to be around her, and so I've got to be somewhere else while she's here. So we work out something. I don't mind that her mother's here, not a problem. But I can't be here. Or I say, or why don't we do this? We'll take money out of the savings that we had accumulated for our next vacation, and we'll send you to visit your mother. Or we'll make it so that your mother goes to a neutral place, to your sister's house, whom I also detest. And you and your sister can visit with your mother, and so you can be with two people who I dislike equally, and you can both have fun with her together. See what I'm saying? Robin's reminding me that Oahu is really Oahu. I know that, but see, all of the Palangis don't know that. So there are many solutions that you can come up with when you're trying to love your partner, as opposed to, I'm not having that horrible witch in our house, and putting your foot down. Once you are trying to care about your partner, you can work out all kinds of things. And work them out really fairly easily. Donna will come up with solutions, for example, that I hadn't thought of. Now, mind you, this is hypothetical. I mean, Donna's mother's not alive, so this isn't real, those of you who are listening to this. When you care about your partner, when you are loving to your partner, it is astonishing how quickly you can work out the details of apparent conflicts. Because it turns out that conflicts are not about differences of opinion. Conflicts are about emptiness and fear. Conflicts are about the presence of getting and protecting behaviors. I mean it, almost invariably. Here's somebody who says, I had a rat in my house 2 weeks ago. It somehow got in when I was away and could not get out. It was obviously large from the damage it was doing. When I came home, I found door jambs eaten a third of the way up, holes along the edge of my carpet, which was expensive, rat feces everywhere I went. I called the pest company. They set traps, but the rat remained and continued to do damage. It came into my room one night at 1 in the morning. For those of you who have never seen a really large rat, a large Norway rat is as big as a small cat. I fled to my daughter's in San Francisco, setting traps in every room and at every door. I came back to a well-fed rat. All the bait was gone and empty traps. I didn't sleep for days. I complained. I was furious at the rat. I slept with my doors wide open at night, hoping that it would leave on its own, but it didn't. It was a nightmare. Then after a week of this, a friend said to me this, "It's just a rat doing what rats do. Let the rat be a rat. It's not doing it to you. It's doing it because it's frightened and trying to survive. The only reason you're suffering so much is because of what you're telling yourself about the rat. You think it shouldn't be doing what it's doing. You believe if it were different, you wouldn't suffer. But the truth is, it won't hurt you unless you threaten it. Let the rat be a rat. That changed my life. I realized that I go around seeing rats and I rail against them and tell them they should be different and they shouldn't do things that bother me or frighten me. I try to get the rats to do what I want and be what I think that I need them to be. I'm learning to let rats be rats. In the end, I decided to change my mind about the rat. I accepted that the rat was trying to survive. I actually felt compassion for the rat. I knew I could repair any damage it did. If I tried to poison it, it would probably go into the walls and die and leave a stink, so I left the doors open, put the food outside. And on the 8th day, the rat did unfortunately get smacked in the head by one of the traps and died. I thanked the rat for being my teacher and was actually grateful to the rat. Today I'm learning to accept that I too am a rat. I too do things because I'm just trying to survive. I do not do things to others. I do them to feel better, and without realizing it, I do harm. So I accept myself. I learn what doesn't work. Getting trapped in a bad situation trying to do what I want, or what does work, get out when the door opens, trust that I will have everything I need. I know I'm loved, loving and lovable, and I rely on God to provide for all my needs. That's a pretty good story. People don't intentionally do things to us. They do things because they're rats trying to survive. They do things because they're drowning, trying to keep their heads above water. And then we get all upset at them because they're just being themselves. That's all. I was at a seminar recently and somebody came to me and they complained bitterly about the behavior of somebody who had been in the seminar and said, why don't you do something about this particular person whose behavior they felt was distracting and obnoxious and rude, and I should stop it. And I said to them, frankly, I'm not the least bit distracted by that person's seminar. Perhaps this is something that will be enormously instructive to you. This is obviously something you need to learn from. If you find this behavior irritating, and if I don't, then there's something about you that needs to change. So you might look at that. Just an idea. You don't have to, but there's something about you that could be different, could be more loving. And they did. So it's always about us. That doesn't mean that there isn't also something about that person that doesn't need to change in order for them to be happier too. It doesn't mean that. But it's not the other person's fault when we become irritated, empty, afraid, and so on. My 12-year-old son and his friends from sports in the neighborhood are starting to do a lot of teasing and put down jokes with each other. They consider it fun, and none of them has a problem with it yet. None of them has a problem with it yet. I just spoke with a pediatrician today who spoke to me about peer pressure, and he believes that I should be discouraging my son from participating in this kind of joking. That's what my son calls it. The doctor had a very detailed discussion of peer pressure and believes that the simplest solution is to teach our kids to be kind and compassionate from a young age, and that this teasing can lead to trouble down the road. And you're right. It does. Children who tease each other and do put-downs, it becomes a kind of sport. It seems to be really fun at the time, and it can be from moment to moment. But the fun gets out of hand very easily. Kind of like taking one drink can be really fun. But you go from one drink to drunk in no time, and then you're screwed. So, amongst friends who really know and trust each other, amongst friends who really thoroughly understand each other, An occasional put-down joke can be funny. Can be. But I'm telling you, they are thoroughly risky and dangerous. And I've watched people do this all my life. And people who are truly loving don't do them. They don't. I learned to do them from an early age, and in the school that I attended, put-down jokes were a varsity sport. Really, you lettered in this. And I lettered every year. I was a champion. And it became mean, became really mean. And invariably, the people who did it, including me, involved people. We eventually, always, leveled our jokes at people who did not give us permission to use them as the butt of our jokes. And so invariably we learn to become increasingly unkind and to bully people. And so it becomes a form of really mean-spirited and especially subtle bullying, because when you punch somebody in the face, you leave a bruise. When you punch somebody, you see their face move. It's obvious to everybody when you're hitting them. When you do this kind of put-down joking, the bullying isn't nearly as obvious, and so you get away with it more often. You get away with it longer, and it can be even more venomous. So rather than tell your son, don't do this, it's way more effective to, for example, give him some examples of put-down jokes. And what some examples, for example, of put-down jokes would be if you did them with him. And say, so, would you enjoy it if I said this to you? Would you enjoy it if I made fun of you in these ways? He wouldn't. And ask him, how does he enjoy it when you refer to him in openly positive ways, with no sarcasm, with no put-downs? Ask him how he likes that. Everybody does. And that when people are put down without their permission, when people are put down in veiled ways, ask him how easy it is for that to be misunderstood. It really is. Ask him about occasions when he's been put down by you and by his other parent and by other kids and by older people or by his own peers. And ask him about occasions when it's been misinterpreted or when he's felt stung by it, and ask him how he's felt, whether he's felt loved and happy. And show him how just potentially horribly damaging it is. And then just ask him to consider that and to think about it. Then if you ever see him participating in that, then you have the discussion again. So rather than telling him to quit it, you just use these as teaching opportunities. Kids aren't stupid. You don't have to discipline them. You don't have to restrict their activities. You just keep loving and teaching them. And they quit it. It's your loving of him. See, when a child is engaged in an unloving activity, and then you come in and in an unloving way say, I want you to stop that, you can't fight you can't fight unloving with unloving. It's craziness, and a child feels the insanity of that. No, you eliminate unloving by loving them, and that's what makes the difference. Let me remind us all that on August 2nd and 3rd in Phoenix there's going to be a parenting seminar, which people have been looking forward to for some time. Parenting is a theme that transfers to pretty much everything, since a parent is really just anybody who nurtures, anybody who loves and teaches. So which that would apply to everything. It would apply to teachers, it would apply to business leaders, it would apply to anybody who leads in any way. So I would highly recommend this. So August 2nd and 3rd in Phoenix, you can learn about it on the website. Saturday and Sunday, lunch is included. Go online. There are parents who've been waiting for this for, many months. Here's a question from an ant, not the insect kind, but the human kind. AUNT. My nephew is here. He's messy with food. Not like, like not scraping his plate when he's done eating. He's lazy. He doesn't clean up after himself after showers, leaves towels around, doesn't close packages back, that kind of thing. Shame upon it, she says. I told him when he got here that I expected him to clean up after himself. So he's there visiting his aunt for like a month. I told him that I expect him to clean up after himself and just put things back like you found them. This is clearly not happening. So as I've come across things, I just call him without anger and say, John, we're making up his name, you need to put this here, move this, get this, whatever, put things back. The deal is that I'm saying this more than I'm doing anything else. I'm finding it difficult to say good job to anything. Today I came in from work and I looked on the floor near my daughter's dog, who's already stressed, and he's shredding this pen, the remnants of an ink pen on the floor, and making a real mess. I feel like I'm babysitting someone's child because obviously this nephew left the pen on the floor and the floor was being made a mess of because the dogs found this pen that the nephew left on the floor. Was he responsible? I'm not sure, but virtually certain that he left it on the floor. I mean, the kid really is this lazy, she says. You'd think he would just pick things up and not just leave them there on the floor. And you'd think that he heard the dog crunching the pen, but he doesn't even get up and, pick up his mess. And this kid mumbles like you wouldn't believe. He's been yelled at every day since he began to crawl, this nephew. Let's see, how old did she say he was? She didn't say, but as I remember, because I know this kid from her descriptions, I think he's like 13, pretty sure. He mumbles like you wouldn't believe. He's been yelled at every day since he began to crawl. He used to have a genuine smile, but now it's forced. So you get in the picture of this kid. He's like 13 years old. He's been emotionally just beaten to a pulp from birth. He wants to wear his pants off of his behind, and I absolutely will not allow that. You know how kids wear their jeans, where it looks like they're about to fall off their behinds, and I don't know how they do that, but they do it. I told him nicely that if he wants to stay here with me, I never want to see his underwear, ever. I guess because I was raised to say yes ma'am and no sir, it sends shockwaves through me every time he doesn't say yes ma'am and no sir. He rarely says it. Sometimes I correct him, sometimes I don't. I'm not sure how to impose consequences since he's only here for a short time. Do I send him home? I'm actually relieved that he's not being yelled at for the next month, so I don't really want to send him home. My question is, what's an aunt to do? This isn't all that difficult. You're not his mother. You're his aunt. He comes, it sounds like, it doesn't sound like, he comes from a home that's very unloving. He comes from a home where he wasn't loved or taught, either one. So he comes from a place where you just described. He's been yelled at from birth. He hasn't been taught because he comes into the house. The kid doesn't know how to wear his clothes. He doesn't know how to speak English. He mumbles. He's been emotionally beaten because, like you said, he mumbles. He hangs his head. He doesn't know how to do chores. He doesn't know how to respond to adults like a human being. The kid has been beaten up. And you want him to respond to you as though he were emotionally healthy. Well, that's crazy. So it's kind of like, imagine that you're a math teacher and this kid comes into your class and with him comes a file that says he has an IQ of 43. So he's retarded. Would you expect him to know algebra? No. Would you expect him to know his times tables? No. So what would you do? You'd love him and pat his head, and you'd be happy with pretty much anything that you could teach him to do. Anything. So you're talking about applying consequences to an emotionally battered and emotionally retarded child, when what the kid really needs is to feel loved. Now, with a child that you had been raising all this time, you might be talking about loving and then teaching and then consequences. But if you remember in the parenting book, you do lots of loving, then you do loving and teaching, then after lots of loving and teaching, then you do consequences. Well, now, how much sense would it make in 1 month, which is all you're going to have this kid, to go straight through loving, teaching, straight to consequences in a month? That's craziness. So with this kid, consequences, that's just like nuts. So all you're going to do is love this kid. You're going to teach him maybe a little. I mean, you know, when he doesn't put the cereal box back, you may call him and say, hey, you know, John, come on in. And, you know, you'll be sitting there eating and you'll say, hey, John, would you put the cereal back in the pantry or whatever it is, just as calm as though you were describing the color of his hair. And he'll put the box back in and you'll say, hey, it's really good to see you again this morning. Sure love you. Put the box back in the pantry. And that's it. You're done. You won't say, this is the 3rd time I've asked you to do it. No, you'll just ask him to put it back in the pantry just as calm as a summer breeze. Years ago, we had a little kid from inner city Atlanta that we had come up and stay with us for, was it a summer, I think? It was quite a period of time. And this kid had had the emotional tar beaten out of him his whole life. And he was 11, 12, something like that. I mean, this kid was just beaten to a pulp. He was still peeing his pants. He wasn't just wetting the bed. He would sit watching the television and didn't have the emotional energy to get out of his chair. He would sit in his chair watching television and pee his pants in the chair. Do you think we gave him consequences when he didn't do his chores? We virtually held his hand and was hold his hand while he picked up the fork and set the table. So here's where you put the fork, and here's where you put the knife, and here's where you put the spoon, and would praise him if he managed to do 2 place settings in a row. If he managed to not pee the bed 1 night in 5, we celebrated. This kid was an emotional cripple. So you have to set an entirely different standard. He's not your son, and he just wasn't raised in a healthy place. You just have to reorient yourself with this kid. Like, a lot. Somebody said, I was reading in the Wise Man and Woman book where you began to figure out that people loved you when you told the truth. I was wondering how you figured that out. Could you talk a little bit about that on the call tonight? You know, when I first began the process of writing about real love, or first began the process of learning about real love, it wasn't so much a figuring out, it was a feeling it out. So we were gathering in groups, because the groups came before the books. And we would sit around and we were just experimenting. I mean, we were trying techniques, we were burning sage, we were practicing Native American rituals, we were trying everything there was. And one of the things we would do is just sit around and tell stories, talk about our past, describe our mistakes, anything. And one of the things that we learned kind of by trial and error was just describing what we'd done, either in the past or in the present or last week, and I learned that as I just told the truth about the mistakes I'd made, and people just kind of, went, yeah, I get it. I understand. And as I perceived that without any feedback, nobody trying to tell me how to be different, nobody saying, well, you really ought to do this, or here's what it would take to fix you. As people just accepted me, I could feel that. And I got to tell you, for some time I didn't know what that was. But I felt different. I felt closer to them. I felt connected to them. I felt different. I felt less afraid. I felt less empty. I felt, and I couldn't put words to this for some time. But gradually, I formed words for this. I felt less empty. I felt less afraid. I felt more connected. I was able to formulate words for it, all the words we now know. And then eventually, it distilled into, whoa, I felt more unconditionally loved. Well, I'll be. That's what that is. And then after that, books started to happen. So it was really about a feeling, a whole lot less about a figuring out, although I guess the words I kind of figured out, I suppose. So it wasn't really so much a complicated thing, I guess. Here's well, we got 3. I'm going to try to do this. Here's somebody who says, I have yet to figure out what we're supposed to do when we feel uncomfortable with something our mate does or says. I know I can live with it and like it, live with it and hate it, or leave it, but when we see something that could be better or has gone wrong in the past, should we point it out to them or say nothing? I learned in interpersonal communication class years ago that in taking personal responsibility for something that's happened in a relationship, we use the phrase, when you do whatever, I feel this way. I tried this over the weekend when my partner was acting unfaithful to me by checking out other people when we went to dinner. But due to my exposure to the real love concepts, I immediately heard myself either 1, making him responsible for my feelings, 2, blaming him for his behavior that inconvenienced me, 3, attacking or accusing him, or 4, having an expectation that he should behave how I thought he should. So all this indicates to me that what I learned in communication class is not the way to be if I want to be loving. You're confused. You really can say to somebody how you feel when they behave a certain way. Where we screw up is telling them how we want them to change. So we've come to believe that many people think that we should say to people, I want you to stop doing this. Or we think that we should go to the other extreme and say nothing at all. So change, or sit back and just take it and just be beaten by other people and just accept their behavior. Oh no. You can say to your partner, when your eyes go roving around and you go looking up and down this girl's body and you undress her and you do terrible things to her with your eyes, I'm not suggesting that you should change your behavior. What goes through my mind is that we had made an agreement when we got married that we would be sexually faithful to each other. And when your eyes go up and down her body, it's pretty clear to me that you're not being sexually faithful to me. And so I'm feeling, well, I guess left out. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling empty. I'm feeling even betrayed in a way. I feel frightened, and sometimes I even feel a little angry. And so I just want you to know that my feelings are my responsibility. But those are feelings that surround me when I see that behavior on your part, which is unfaithful. It's your choice what you do. I just want you to know the feelings that come up in me when that happens and the consequences that that has for our relationship. And so it's then your choice whether you want to continue to experience those consequences in our relationship as a result of what you are doing. So if that were to continue to happen, I would be making choices whether I want to stay in a relationship where my partner was continuing to be unfaithful. So I just want you to know what's happening as you are doing that. So notice, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not controlling you, but you need to know the feelings that are going on and what's happening as a result of what you're doing. So nobody's controlling anybody. And if any of that's unclear, let me know and we'll talk more about that next week. I think there was one question that we didn't get to, and I will talk about that next time. But we're at 10 o'clock. It's just been utterly delightful, as it always is. So again, we look forward to seeing you guys in a week. Look forward to seeing you in August 2nd and 3rd in Phoenix. And please, again, send your questions to greg@reallove.com, and we'll deal with those first next Tuesday. And in the meantime, we love you tons. We'll see you next Tuesday.